Bringing a fresh new perspective on the challenges and issues that face our criminal justice system and their impact on all New Yorkers, this is Justice Matters with your host, President of the New York State Supreme Court Officers Association, Patrick Cullen.
Good afternoon to all our listeners here on AM 970 The Answer. My name is Patrick Cullen, and I am the president of the New York State Supreme Court Officers Association, representing the best court officers in the nation. And once again, it's a pleasure to welcome you to another edition of Justice Matters. And before we get to our guests, as I do every week, I'd like to touch upon some of the news and reflect about it, news from the past week or so. Firstly, I'd like to just talk about things your union is doing in action, representative of our activity and results-based action from, the city council, politicians, and the people we need to help us fix some of the problems that we see. Specifically, in this case, I'd like to discuss an issue we brought up and that was published in the Bronx News regarding the Bronx Hall of Justice and the inadequate situation regarding the courtyard plaza that has been planned since its opening 11 years ago and the planning stages many years before that. A building that was many, many millions of dollars over budget and obviously over time on schedule. Well, we discussed this with the Bronx News, and they published a story highlighting these inadequacies and obviously our unpreparedness through short staffing to maintain and maximize security in the location. In addition to faulty construction, which is considerably still ongoing in many ways, still fixing many of the problems during the construction of this facility that's used by hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers every year. City Councilman Richie Torres from the Bronx took up action after seeing this investigative piece in the Bronx News and launched an investigation. I believe he's in charge of the Department of Investigation, and called for an investigation into the procedure which New York City got into business with construction companies that had major problems. We welcome this investigation. We welcome any investigation into the misuse of public funds, of taxpayer money. So we applaud City Councilman Richie Torres for his initiative to look into this problem, which I believe will at some point make sure that the people who work in that courthouse, myself included, and our fellow citizens and neighbors who use that court are safer. In the long run, we want to make sure that that facility is as safe as possibly can be. So we thank Councilman Richie Torres for, and we commend him for his actions in this regard, and stand ready to assist him in any possible way we can going forward to expose these types of abuses. Again, this is your union in action. We see a problem, we develop a strategy and expose it, and now a city councilman is acting upon it for the Department of Investigation and a city agency to look into. I'm proud of it, and I'm confident that at the end of the day, we will see a safer, more secure facility for all of us. Additionally, I did want to touch on another issue this week, and that's the passing of longtime Queens District Attorney Richard Brown. He was 86 years of age and served longer than any New York City District Attorney, I believe 28 years in the office. And in those 28 years, I think it's important to note, he held the highest conviction rate in the 5 boroughs. That, as a prosecutor, is success. And Judge Brown's success statistically speaks for itself, but I think his success and his legacy is even greater. Don't know if we've ever encountered a more respected individual from in and around the court system and on the prosecutorial side of things. Our thoughts and our prayers are with the Brown family and with the Queens District Attorney's Office, who has lost its shepherd for close to 3 decades. It's a loss that will be felt, but I believe that Judge Brown's impact on the county and the citizens of Queens County will last a lifetime. And so, again, we want to just recognize his life and his legacy, and we wish the Brown family the best in the future. Our first guest today is the minority whip of the New York City Council, proudly representing the South Shore of Staten Island since 2015. Prior to that, he represented the 62nd District in the New York State Assembly, and he serves as the chairman of the Committee on Fire and Emergency Management, and also serves on the Education Committee for the largest public school system in the United States, Parks and Recreation, for-hire vehicles, cultural affairs, libraries, and international relations. Councilman Joe Borelli, it sounds like your work schedule is pretty full with all of those.
I still find time to read and get to the movies every now and then.
That's
but thank
good.
you so much for having me.
No, absolutely. It's a pleasure to have you, and I really have wanted to have you on because I hear you on other programs on this station, and I'm always impressed with your grasp of so many different corners of what's happening in New York City. And, you know, we're focused on really what's happening in and around the justice system, but so much of what happens in the city council affects our membership too, because transportation issues affect our members. Vast majority of our members live within the four corners of New York City. So we wanted to touch on kind of a little of both, and your background as an assemblyman also. But
keep in mind, so much of the work the city council does is about reforming the justice system. Unfortunately, the work of court officers, correction officers, police officers, pretty much anyone involved on the law enforcement side of the justice system is just left off the map. I mean, to be honest, and that's one of the biggest things I've done in my career is try to be a voice for some of those folks.
Yeah, and it shows through in your reputation, and we appreciate yourself and, you know, like-minded politicians like yourself to make sure that the middle class, the working class person is taken care of. Tell us a little bit about your upbringing and also how you got involved in politics at such a young age.
Sure. So I grew up in Staten Island on the South Shore. I've lived in the zip code I live in now for just about my entire life, save for my 4-year Rumspringa in college. I went to Marist College. When I came home, I wanted to be a billionaire, but it didn't work out. So I got involved with local politicians, just doing campaigns. I've always sort of been a Republican, so I got involved with a guy named Vinny Ignizio, who was running for assembly at the time, and we won. And I became a staffer, and I really never looked back. And I've just enjoyed it ever since. In addition to holding an elective office, I also teach at CUNY. I teach political science, so I sort of live, eat, and breathe politics. I get to write. I write for a national magazine called The Hill. So this is sort of my life, and it's kind of enjoyable, especially since, like I said, I've lived here my whole life. To be able to have somewhat of an impact on the quality of life and basically the lives of my friends that I've grown up with.
Yeah, it's so critical to be immersed in what you do, I think, and pay attention to really so much of what's going on. And again, it sounds like you have such a grasp of so many different angles, and that's evident by, in addition to your city council work, educating and writing and communicating. It's so important. Now, I know you just recently announced that you're running for New York City Public Advocate, and the question is, why are you running for New York City Public Advocate?
Well, it's not really to get anything done, because if I was trying to get anything actually done, I'd run for any other office but the public advocate. The city charter, as it stands right now, gives the public advocate just about no authority to do anything to impact people's lives. I mean, the number one job is to be first in line of succession in case the mayor dies, resigns, or perhaps in this case gets elected president. So, I promise to all your listeners, I'll hit the gym. I'll make sure I'm alive should that day sadly occur. The second thing is to be the city's ombudsman and basically make recommendations to city agencies on how things can be changed. As I said to a newspaper earlier this week, if you're the poor schmuck on the Gowanus who's taking a picture of a pothole and sending it to DOT and demanding they fix the pothole, you're essentially doing the actual charter-mandated job of the public advocate. That's how ridiculous of a role it is. And the other job of the public advocate is to take complaints. So the public advocate's office takes complaints just like 311. It has 50 staffers. Unfortunately, the office is duplicative of what 311 does, and we can complain about 311 all day, but it handles 39 million calls a year and emails and app contacts, but 39 million cases a year, and it tracks them. And for $40 million, it actually does a much more efficient job. So this is a job with really no authority, no purpose. And unfortunately, in calendar year 2019, we're going to spend $40 million in electing and staffing this office with no actual purpose. $40 million, just to give a comparison, is more than the city spends on its own Office of Emergency Management. And those people are stockpiling for Armageddon. And yet we're gonna spend all this time to have these elections, to have matching funds. Now we see a case where one of the 17 candidates who ran for this office in February is actually being accused of corruption with the matching funds. Not something that's really a surprise to most people. But this is what the public is going to pay for this office. And unfortunately, they're not going to get anything for their dollar.
Right. I think, that shows a lot of responsibility that you recognize the waste and the issues with the office. And that's why you're running, because you don't want to sit on the outside and complain how inefficient it might be. Let me get in there and do something. And we're going to take a quick break. And if you'd be kind enough to hang around, I want to talk about the op-ed that you wrote recently in the Daily News. We'll be right back with Justice Matters and Councilman Joe Borelli right after this.
We return now to Justice Matters with the president of the New York State Supreme Court Officers Association, Patrick Cullen.
Welcome back to Justice Matters, everybody. We're speaking with New York City Councilman Joe Borelli from Staten Island, who is running for New York City Public Advocate. Joe, you recently wrote an op-ed in the Daily News entitled Public Advocate Office, Pump It or Dump It. What was that about?
So basically, it's as simple as that title, Pump It or Dump It. This is an office, like we talked about in the last segment, with just about no public responsibility or duties. I have made some suggestions to give this office a purpose. The two main ones I've suggested were that the city's Department of Investigation be put under the purview of the public advocate, something I've already been carrying a bill in the city council for.
Yes.
That would immediately insulate the commissioner of the Department of Investigation from being fired when the department actually does its job and investigates the mayoral administration. If you think that can't happen, that's exactly what happened last year.
Right, it did happen.
The mayor fired Mark Peters. I mean, This is something that progressives go crazy over when they think about Donald Trump firing Bob Mueller. And at our little macro city level, this is exactly what happened. I mean, this is what happened at the state level too, with Andrew Cuomo firing his own Moreland Commission.
Moreland Commission, yes, absolutely.
The other thing is to make the public advocate either a board member or have an appointment to the public authorities that have control over just about all of our lives. I mean, whether it's the MTA or the Port Authority or the Water Board or the City Planning. I mean, although he's actually an appointee on the City Planning Committee already, but the Board of Standards and Appeals. I mean, all of these boards that, thanks to the legacy of Robert Moses, have an outsized role in the governing of the city and the making of policy and the shaking down of the taxpayers. I would want the public advocate to have a seat so that we have an elected representative, not just an appointed person. Right now, the governor has a hegemony over the MTA. The mayor has a hegemony over the City Planning Commission.
Right.
This shouldn't be the case. These are people who are making laws that affect us in the same way the City Council does, and there's no retribution. The governor even goes out on a limb and says, I don't control the MTA. That's complete bull. I mean,
right.
The governor appoints every person on the board.
Right. And so essentially, we're saying, make this relevant, give us some teeth, let us do some work for the people who elect us, and if not, then let's dissolve the office.
Right. I mean, if not, unfortunately, the public advocate doesn't even have the authority to scrap his own office. But I would have the authority to cut my office down from 50 people spending $3.8 million a year down to 5, 6 people. That would be the first step. But I would advocate just the way we advocate for charter changes right now, for a total scrapping of the office and give the role of second in line of mayoral succession to the comptroller, who actually does have some authority and some fiduciary duty to the taxpayers. I mean, right. It's certainly a better person to handle, the unlikely event of the mayor dying.
Right. I mean, government accountability, Joe. It's so rare in this world these days, and it's really refreshing to hear your take on it. I'm going to run for this, but we want to make sure that it's accountable and that the money that's being spent on it is going to the right types of initiatives. And I mean, it's so commendable, that take, and I wish there were more people doing that.
No, but let's be objective. Arguably, Mayor de Blasio, or Bill de Blasio, and Letitia James were the most successful public advocates in the short history of the office. They both went on to run and win higher office.
Yes.
I'll ask any New Yorker, what did they actually do that didn't involve just doing a press release or some report as public advocate that justified their electoral success in higher office? They did nothing. They issued reports. They tweeted. They talked about things. That's fine, because that's really all the job is. But it's not like they ever had to make a tough decision. I can criticize Mayor de Blasio all day long, but at least he is forced with making tough decisions that do impact people. The public advocate does not. And
Sure.
and it's amazing why they still – I mean, if I had a job where all I get to do is yell at the bad and aren't responsible for any of the decisions, I mean, you would think you'd win any office you'd run for after that.
Sure, but you got to follow up with activity too. But speaking of the mayor de Blasio, he recently announced cuts to all city agencies for the first time since he was elected mayor. Can you highlight some of these that might affect us in the criminal justice system, and also let us know what are the cuts that you're really fighting against?
Look, I'm not, as a Republican, I'm not fighting a lot of these cuts. I mean, these are called pegs. They're programs to eliminate the gap. In most cases, most agencies aren't seeing a drastic cut. And a lot of the things that we associate with cuts are just repurposing of bad policies. If the Parks Department repurposes, say, $20 million, there's a good chance that it's not cutting any particular service. It's just eliminating a program that wasn't getting the visitors, wasn't getting the job done for whatever it was doing. Perhaps it was a maintenance program or not. So every once in a while, it's actually good for the administration to do something like this. What's not good is that we're still adding $2 or $3 billion of new spending. Some of that is because of contractual obligations. I mean, everyone's contract has a raise. I mean, that's all fair, and that's wonderful. Some of it's the fact that we finance long-term debt in an incredibly inefficient way, where we take out as much capital money as we possibly can, and then we spend decades financing it. And we also spend 20 years building the thing in certain cases. I mean, it takes 5 years to build a bathroom in New York City parks. Right. If I was public advocate, and even as a council member, those are the kind of things that I've been speaking about. But I want to be clear. Having an agency trim itself every couple of years is not the worst thing.
No, I would not disagree with you on that. I think that a real responsible fiduciary outlook is important, and when you can trim the fat, you must. And some of what you mentioned there can be related to what I mentioned at the beginning of our show today, is the Bronx Hall of Justice and Councilman Torres's investigation into some of the contracts and the misuse of taxpayer funds to get it done. I think it was a couple of $100 million over budget and a number of years ahead of, behind schedule. I mean, those types of things are unacceptable.
Look, this is the norm. This is the norm with the majority of projects that are run by the city's Department of Design and Construction. I will say something positive about the mayor. He actually fired the DDC commissioner in 2017 because the guy was a complete and unmitigated disaster. It took a decade to build a baseball field in my district, which sounds crazy, but it took literally a decade to build a baseball field on Staten Island. So when you think about the complexity of a project like a giant court building in the Bronx, you almost come to expect that it's going to be over budget and delayed, and there just doesn't seem to be any priority or any real urgency on the part of the mayor to change this. He did make a good step. He took the commissioner of the School Construction Authority, which is surprisingly an efficient agency, and he made the woman who runs that the head of DDC. I'm optimistic. I'm willing to give them a little time,
Sure.
But it should not take 5 years to fix a bathroom in a New York City park. It's absurd.
No,
it really is absurd.
I was listening to the Yankee game the other night, and they mentioned that the original Yankee Stadium was built in a year. So 10 years for a kid's baseball field is it's emblematic of what the city has become with red tape and misuse,
and for the
abuse.
taxpayer, so we issue a general obligation bond every year. We issue about $10 billion of bonds, and then we have 20 years to pay those off. So, for the case of this baseball field, half the time we were paying the debt on this baseball field, there was no baseball being played. The project existed as a piece of paper or a twinkle in some consultant's eye.
Right.
I mean, this is a real problem where we spend the money, we're servicing the debt on it, and we're getting nothing.
Absolutely. Before we get to the end of our conversation today, give me that one big issue that you're tackling right now in the city council.
Honestly, I think there's nothing more important for folks in the outer boroughs than property taxes. New York City used to be an affordable option to the suburban counties, whether they be in Long Island or upstate or in New Jersey. But this mayor has allowed property taxes to run away. And it is just inconceivable how people are being priced out of their homes. I mean, I love New York City. I love living here. I love everything about Staten Island where I live. But if I don't be honest with you and tell you that I browse Zillow every night or get the updates from Realtor.com about what's happening in Maryland or Arizona or Texas, I mean, I'd be lying to you.
Yeah.
I mean, this is why New York City is losing population, and this is why it's going to continue losing population.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. And when you start to see some of the statistics,
and don't forget, your employees that work in downtown Manhattan now are going to make $2,600 less than their counterparts who work in the Bronx or anywhere else.
Sure, right. And that's really problematic for us. I'm glad you brought up the property tax, because that is truly what's driving people out of New York. And I really wish we had some more time to get into some more of the topics that you're tackling on it. I will absolutely have you back.
On the property
taxes. Yeah, I know. I actually, just want to, tell you, you have our support for in your candidacy for public advocate. And anytime somebody comes out and says, I'm looking to make government more accountable, we're going to have your back. I know that you support a lot of what we do, and I couldn't appreciate it more. And also, thank you really for coming on the show today to discuss some of this stuff.
Anytime. Thank you so much.
Welcome back anytime. Councilman Joe Borelli from Staten Island. Justice Matters will be back right after this.
Welcome back to Justice Matters with your host, Patrick Cullen, president of the New York State Supreme Court Officers Association.
Welcome back. Justice Matters. The second half of this week's show, we're going to hear from some of the boots on the ground, our officers. It was one of the main reasons we wanted to begin doing a program like this, was to hear the experiences of our officers broadcast to people who don't know quite much about what we do, but also a lot of the inherent risks and some of the hazardous situations that we find ourselves in. We're going to use our guest's first name only for security reasons. So joining me on Justice Matters is Kevin. Thanks for taking the time out to join me today.
Good morning, Pat.
Tell us a little about yourself, where you grew up, and why did you decide to become a court officer?
I was born and raised in Queens. The courthouse I work at is about 2 blocks from the high school I went to, so in 20 years I haven't gotten really far. But I had friends growing up whose fathers were NYPD, FDNY, sanitation, MTA. When I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, court officer seemed like a good job. I had family who worked in the courts, and it seemed like a good job, good benefits, promotional opportunities, great schedule, Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, vacations. And at the same time, it was my chance to get back to the community and, the place where I grew up.
Yeah, no, that's, I've said this when we've had members on before. That's the running theme. People said this is steady employment with really great benefits, a lot of great benefits, but the ability to help people, especially the people in and around your community. But what we always also hear is that people have family, people have friends, they have neighbors who work in the court system, and it's a testament to the system we work in that so many people do encourage their friends and neighbors and family to get involved and at least take the civil service exams. Tell me a little bit about your daily responsibilities at your workplace.
I work in criminal Supreme Court, and on a daily basis, I can work in a trial or arraignment part. We see everything from, low-level petty larcenies and DWIs to, major cases like, rapes and murders. We're there to make sure all the proceedings are conducted, in an impartial manner. Everyone there is safe. People can come to the courthouse, conduct their business, and feel secure while doing so. We are the police in the courthouse. We make arrests. We bring incarcerated defendants into court. We respond to emergencies. On any given day, we could be doing any number of things to protect the public and to make sure proceedings go as planned.
Sure, yeah. It's really such a varied experience. You never know what you're going to get when you put a uniform on in this city to protect your fellow citizens. You're never quite sure what the day is going to bring. Our job, what we try to do is expose certain inadequacies in the system and make sure that those get fixed so that the one thing that we do experience every day is going home safely. Have you? Yeah, I mean, I think that you recognize that that's the number one goal, is to make sure we get home to our families safe at the end of the day, correct?
Absolutely. Our goal at the beginning of the day is that every day everyone goes home safe.
Yep.
And, that's paramount. That's the most important thing to all of us.
That's the mission, absolutely. So speaking of that, what are some, feel free to tell us stories or just relay some of the more dangerous incidents you've either witnessed or been involved with.
Pat, in my 14 years, most of the dangerous incidents that I've been involved with happens down in the pens and down in the jail, dealing with incarcerated defendants. Some of the situations that I've dealt with go from random things like trying to search a prisoner before he goes to see before the judge, and we discover a razor blade or a piece of plexiglass that's been fashioned into a weapon, to bringing defendants back to court and they get into a fist fight with corrections over a cheese sandwich.
Right.
And we're sitting there now, trying to help the correction officers get the situation under control.
Sure.
And where there's 2 or 3 correction officers down there and 2 or 3 court officers, there could be upwards of 10 to 20 inmates.
Right.
And it's a dangerous situation.
Yeah, no, those are absolutely I think, our worst situations. Things happen everywhere. But you're right. Our relationship with the Department of Corrections has, I think, eroded over the years, and I think it's due to the current administration in the city of New York with Mayor de Blasio and his treatment of his own officers, and some of the disconnect between a state agency and a city agency interfacing. And we've tried to bring to attention to our agency the importance of delineating our job responsibilities, where it begins and where it ends, in the transport and custody of incarcerated defendants, and where the New York City Department of Corrections responsibilities begin and end. In your location, we were actually able to work on that and actually solve some of the problems. Doesn't mean that it's not dangerous, but have you seen a difference after we fixed some of those issues in your location?
Absolutely, Pat. There has to be a line. And the reason for the line is that different agencies have different policies. And it's only fair to the inmates that they know who they're dealing with.
Right.
It becomes very confusing for them when we have to search them. They don't understand why that they were already searched because another agency searched them, and we do a custodial transfer. We have to search them.
Right.
And the last thing they want to do before they go into a judge to get sentenced or to get bad news is be searched 3 or 4 times.
Sure.
And for our safety, we have to do it.
Absolutely.
And a situation like that becomes difficult, because I understand that the guy doesn't want to be searched 3 and 4 times.
Sure.
At the same time, we have to do it.
Yep. And so we're pleased with the fact that we got the problem solved, but the real problem was that it took 1.5 years to do. And so we're currently working on the same situation in the Supreme Courts in Manhattan, in New York County, where the same types of incidents are happening, where we're put at risk when we shouldn't be. And the union has done everything to try and bring this to the attention, but it has to go through so much red tape to get this done, and it becomes frustrating for us and obviously for the men and women that work in the pens. Ultimately, recently we just had some communications from there that, it's a free-for-all. Everybody's smoking marijuana in the cells in the courthouse. I mean, who's controlling that? Now we're charged with bringing impaired defendants to face trial. That's absurd. And so, I continue to call on the Office of Court Administration to take a stand for the officers that work for them to help us in a much more timely fashion than it took in your work location to fix these problems and to make sure that the people they employ are safer in their workplace. But I appreciate your insight on the dangers. And I've said this a few times on this show. I think what we have to sometimes weigh is inherent risk of being a law enforcement officer or working in a hazardous workplace. And I think that some of the staffing issues we've faced over a period of time. Our agency has put us in hazardous positions. But, that's not to say that you can't expect. You might go to work and you might get hurt. That's part of the deal. That's part of the what you're getting yourself into. And so with respect to that, have you seen, have you been hurt as a result of dangerous situations in and around your workplace?
I've been involved in several incidents around the courthouse where we've gotten into incidents with unruly defendants, and we've gotten into full-on fights trying to regain custody of them and get them cuffed. And I've missed some time at work.
Yeah, and that's not. Nobody wants to miss time at work. We've had some of our affiliates come in on this program and discuss the daunting task of what happens when you do get hurt at work. And thank God you're all right now. You've healed. You're back at work. But there are certain people who may not ever return to work as a result of. Again, is it a risk I know I'm getting myself into, or is there some negligence that causes a hazardous condition to continue in a workplace, and is the agency then responsible for the injury that you sustained? I mean, do you have any insight on that, Kevin?
Pat, when I was hurt, I was fortunate enough to get back right away, and I reached out to the union and I spoke with Jordan and what he could do and how he could help me, and what paperwork I needed. And I don't know what the solution is, Pat, for guys not to get hurt, and how we can better make the workplace more safe, less hazardous. But, the union is here for us, and that's nice knowing.
Right. I appreciate that, because that's really our ultimate goal, is to be there for everybody in any way we can. But when you get hurt, or even some of your coworkers who've gotten hurt, do you think that staffing level shortages played a role in that? Could some of those injuries have been avoided if we have been at full staff, which we really haven't been since about 2009, 2010. So, you think that played a role?
I don't know, Pat. I mean, you can always use more officers,
right?
Unfortunately, you never know when something's going to happen, so you need to be fully staffed all the time.
Sure.
You can't pick your spots and rob Peter to pay Paul.
Right.
You need the proper amount of staffing in all the courtrooms and all the pens and and all the patrols and everywhere where they're supposed to be.
Right. You were just recently assigned to the courthouse where they held they've held many big media-focused cases recently. The Karina Vetrano, who was the victim of a homicide in Queens, and a lot of media attention before, during, and even after. What kind of environment does that create on a workplace? Which, let's not forget, when a case like that's going on, there are dozens of other trials going on and hundreds of other cases. So, how do you deal with that media scrutiny and the chaos that it causes?
Pat, staffing levels compound other problems. So we already have people coming to the courthouse every day who are defendants' family, victims' family, and none of them want to be there. Now you throw into this mix a high-profile case where you have hundreds of people, activists, protesters, and when you combine all that, it's basically a hotbed. Something's going to happen. During the Vetrano trial, you had anywhere of 100, 200 people in the courtroom every day, 100 on each side, and at any minute, something could happen. And the only thing that we have on the job is each other. When that radio call comes over, 1013 or 1085, that help's coming. Unfortunately, with less staffing, that help could take a little bit longer.
Sure, and then that obviously puts us in a really tough position where we may be injured. Let's take a quick break because there's still some really interesting questions I want to ask you, and I really appreciate your insight. So we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back right after this.
This is Justice Matters with Patrick Cullen, president of the New York State Supreme Court Officers Association.
We're back with Justice Matters. We're talking with one of our fellow court officers, Kevin, who's here just to discuss some of the challenges and changes that he's seen in his career. But before we get to that, I want to ask you, how did you feel about the 6-month-long intensive campaign for safer courts, which ultimately resulted in the Office of Court Administration hiring the largest number of court officers ever? let me know how you felt about that, because the feedback from the membership is the most important thing to me. We listen before we talk at the union, and ultimately, will more court officers translate into better court security?
Pat, I think the membership feels that any attention that we can bring to this issue would help. We all know better than anyone how short-staffed we are, covering each other's lunches and breaks, and not having adequate staff where we need it sometimes, or running back and forth from courtroom to courtroom.
Right.
So the campaign, as long as it brings attention to what the needs of the union are, it's great.
Great. And you think that now we're going to see the biggest class ever graduate in another about four or 5 weeks? Do you think that'll translate into better court security? I mean, they're going to take some time to get up and running on what we do, what we intend them to do. But pretty shortly thereafter, what do you think the translation into security is?
Well, I hope that right after this class is another class, and it takes a while once these officers get out to their commands to actually get trained out in the commands. They don't just come out and they're not ready to go.
Right.
They do need to do some in-house training, and like I said, I think it's a great step forward, this big class. And I hope to see more big classes in the future. No
question. That's our intent, is that it's not just hiring people, it's consistently hiring people. That's the goal.
Absolutely.
So, you mentioned you've been a court officer for 14 years. What are some of the biggest challenges you've faced on the job?
Pat, we discussed earlier about going home safe every day, and that really is the goal. And every day on a daily basis, we're trying to stay one step ahead. All of our facilities, have the metal detectors, and the guys at the mags do a great job of making sure nothing gets in.
But when you say mags, you mean metal detectors,
I'm sorry,
right?
No,
that's fine. That's fine.
But every day they're trying to catch up, and we see aluminum razor blades, we see plexiglass knives, we see plastic handcuff keys, all these things are trying to get around our security. And when you have an incident like a fight or an assault takes place in the courthouse, or there's a domestic violence issue where someone's coming to court because they're facing a case like that, and a fight breaks out, you don't know what's getting in, I guess.
Yeah, I will continue to say it, and at the risk of being duplicative many times over. Nobody walking into a courthouse is happy, and that includes jurors most of the time. Playing a game from a step behind, someone with malicious intent, not a good position to be in. But again, now we're going to fortify our ranks a little bit more with some new members. We hope to have some more after that. But these challenges are going to be ongoing. And so I think it's really our vigilance that makes the system what it is, and how successful we've actually been in preventing a lot of issues. I know, we've did courthouses out there, people have tried to smuggle firearms in. We saw an inert grenade. These are the types of things that we can never take our eye off the ball. There are some bad people out there in this city, and if they're coming to court, we want to make sure that they're not able to carry out whatever plans they might have. And in addition to the ongoing and growing issue in this city of mental health issues, do you see some of these courthouses becoming kind of a gathering place for people that seemingly have mental health issues? Have you experienced that?
Absolutely. More and more every day we run into more EDPs, and even more gangs. We see a lot more gang attendance in court now. They're coming to support their buddies,
right? And
the job has changed because our responsibilities have changed. They've expanded where we're in and around the courthouse, but something's happening within an earshot, and you got guys outside on perimeter patrol. They hear something, they're going to go to it.
Sure. And the gang problem is also, I'm glad you brought it up, because it's really it's continuing. It's been bad, and it's continuing to get worse because there's nowhere for a lot of these kids to turn, number one. So they turn to the gangs, and they're not going to school. So where are they going to go? Well, they're going to go where maybe some of their friends have a case in court and hang out there, especially on a nasty day outside. What is that going to lend itself to? That's going to lend itself to some kind of beef, some kind of, situation where people are looking to fight, settle a score, whatever it might be. And we've found, so many weapons, not just on these younger individuals who are coming to court without cases, but in and around our facilities, hidden, so that if something finds its way outside, there's going to be, not just an altercation, but a violent incident. How's the job changed since you first started?
Like I just said, Pat, our responsibilities definitely have expanded, and unfortunately, when you have two 17 or 18-year-olds, fighting outside the courthouse over something silly, it does take attention away from, protecting the courthouse from something major happening. Post 9/11, facility security, is really important, and in today's world, we have these active shooter situations that pop up all the time, and we need to be prepared for them.
Yeah. Do you think that we are turning the corner on some of that stuff, that we are addressing it, or do you think there's a lot more work that needs to be done?
Pat, my facility, the past 3 years, we've had the active shooter training in our command, and I must say it's the best training that I've received since I've been on the job. The academy staff does a phenomenal job with that. The training is intense. You learn a lot. It's like I said, it's educational, it's practical. I mean, we had that shooting up in Middletown a couple years ago, where the courthouse was there. They were heroes. They stopped the shooter, and this training, getting out to all the members, is important because it's valuable.
I think that's something that we really want the public to know about what we do every day, is that in a moment's notice, and really any uniformed law enforcement personnel in the city, at a moment's notice, the world could change. And we saw that on 9/11, and we've seen that in some of these active shooter incidents around the country, school shootings, the Las Vegas incident, the church shootings. Courthouses are public places, and so we're fearful, but we're ever vigilant, and so we're prepared for it. And I'm so happy to hear that training's been beneficial for you and your coworkers. I want to ask you, on the opposite side, we're talking about some difficult issues, and it's a difficult job. What are some of the things you enjoy the most about being a court officer?
Pat, like I said, I've been in the same spot for 14 years, and I made some great friends, some great friendships. The camaraderie is fantastic. The union does a great job of bringing people together. Fundraisers like the golf outing for the scholarship, and the Met game and the Jet game, and things like that, where we get everyone together and we have a good time. That's very important. Camaraderie is important for the job, because we do depend on each other to have each other's back when something happens.
Right. And morale is a huge goal of ours, because when we were first elected, there was less than zero, and I think we've tried to bring it back up. And if you buy in, then you're on board with it. Some people don't buy in, but then we still have work to do. In relation to that, I think what I want to ask you is, and now that you've appeared on the program, what do you think the impact of this program for our membership has been?
Pat, you do a great job with the show, and any attention that you bring to the union or the job or to our struggle or to our difficulties or to our successes, is great for the union. We have good people in the union. Like I said, a lot of us just want to go home safe every day, and we want to, feed our families and go home at night and see our kids. But this show is great, because you could turn the show on Sunday afternoon and listen to see. Maybe you didn't hear something that was going on, because we are short-staffed and you're running from courtroom to courtroom.
Sure. Well, that's the goal, and it's always been, and will always continue to be. To expose what we do, because we get overlooked. But also a lot of what the union provides for its membership, and speaking to some of the people who help us provide that, and benefits to the membership, and discussing important matters such as pension, health, injuries, staffing, some of the dangers. But do you think that some of this stuff is reaching the membership? You're out there, you're in the command. Are we reaching the membership with this message and this program?
Pat, I think so, and I hope so. People know what's going on. Everybody wants the same thing. Everybody wants to do better for themselves and for their family. And the union does a lot of good things. So I would hope that the members will listen. And if they have a problem, what better outlet than the show to voice that complaint? Reach out to you and say, hey, Pat, I got a problem.
Absolutely. And on that note, I appreciate you coming in today, taking a little time to discuss your career and some of the issues you face. And on that note, I urge you, email me at Cullen, Cullen, at nysscoa.org. Let me know what you think of the show. Let me know if you think it's impactful and useful. Also, let me know if you don't think that. This is a show that we began about you and for you, and we want to hear from you. So reach out. Let us know what you think. We'll see you next Sunday, another episode of Justice Matters.